Investors welcomed the news, sending Nike shares soaring 11% in after-hours trade. Also helping sentiment were forecast-beating results for the latest period. Fourth quarter sales sank 12%, but analysts...
What the CCP did, they corrupted China. In fact, the CCP is probably the biggest criminal organization in the world.
On Sunday, Mike took part in a series of anti-CCP events in Flushing, New York, home to America's largest Chinese community, and for a democratic China and other pro-democracy groups and advocates. The goal was to raise awareness about the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party. Demonstrators held banners bearing bold and unmistakable messages, making their stance clear to all who passed by.
Today on American soil, we deeply sense the Communist Party's infiltration. That's why we are committed to doing everything we can to drive it out.
The message of End CCP was echoed by well-known Taiwanese YouTuber Pa Chi-young. His democratic Taiwan faces the very real threat of invasion from communist China.
The United States should know better than Taiwan how to deal with communism and guard against Communist Party infiltration. After all, you faced this before during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Now it's the Chinese Communist Party. The name may be different, but at its core, it's still the same Marxist-Leninist ideology.
Pa is calling on the American people to rediscover the spiritual courage and convictions that once guided the U.S. in its struggle against the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. July 1st marks the 104th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party.
The city's cooperation with federal immigration authorities. A senior DOJ official commented on the lawsuit on X. Citing LA's so-called sanctuary city policy, the Post reads in part, quote, "We will keep enforcing federal immigration law in Los Angeles, whether or not the city's government or residents agree with it." The Post included a photo of a masked man on a motorbike waving a Mexican flag. The official concluded, quote, "If you don't like it, move to Mexico." The lawsuit comes weeks after President Trump deployed California National Guard troops to Los Angeles to maintain order amid deportation protests. The suit names LA Mayor Karen Bass and the president of the city council.
I'll show you why Joe Biden opened the border. It's this shirt that I'm wearing. The census. That's why Joe Biden opened the border. More congressional seats in the Electoral College, so they can put whoever they want in the White House. That's why. It's dirty pool, I'm telling you. This is what you call piss poor planning. Because the storm drain is over there in the corner. And all this water sits here. I believe this is what made me have to replace my motors going through this. Lake on the Beltline. Isn't this nice? What happened to doing it right? I mean, seriously, guys. I gotta find a way around this mess. Yep, Georgia's been around that long, since 1776, a little bit longer actually. Well, there's Stone Mountain. And I had to come all the way down here just to find out he's still breathing on a respirator, sedated. And now I gotta go back over that way. I'll have fun. They could have put this thing anywhere out here on the outside of this sidewalk. No, they gotta leave it right in the middle of everything. Makes no sense.
Against the haves by any means, and to seize wealth and power in order to achieve a completely, quote, equal society. He sought to seize power through any means, while at the same time destroying the existing social system. He has been called the Lenin of the post-communist left and its Sun Tzu. In Rules for Radicals, published in 1971, Alinsky systematically set forth his theory and methods of community organizing. These rules include, quote, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. Keep the pressure on. The threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. Ridicule is man's most potent weapon. And pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. The essence of his rules was about using immoral means to achieve his goals and gain power. The nature of Alinsky's seemingly dry rules for community organization becomes clear when they are applied in the real world. When the Vietnam War was still in progress in 1972, George H.W. Bush, then U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, gave a speech at Tulane University. Students at the university who were against the war sought advice from Alinsky, who said that protesting with the usual methods would likely result simply in them being expelled. He thus suggested that they don Ku Klux Klan garb, and whenever Bush defended the Vietnam War, they'd stand up with placards and say, quote, the KKK supports Bush. The students did so with very successful, attention-getting results. Alinsky and his followers were delighted with two other protests he planned. In 1964, in negotiations with Chicago city authorities, Alinsky concocted the plan of organizing 2,500 activists to occupy the toilets in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, to force its operations to grind to a halt. Prior to actually carrying off the plan, he leaked the plan, thus forcing the authorities to negotiate. In order to force Kodak, the major employer in Rochester, New York, to increase the ratio of black employees to white, Alinsky came up with a similar tactic, seizing on an important cultural tradition in the city. An upcoming performance of the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, Alinsky planned to purchase hundreds of tickets for his activists and feed them baked beans beforehand, so they could fill the theater and ruin the performance with flatulence. This episode didn't come to fruition, but the threat of it, as well as Alinsky's other tactics, enhanced his position in negotiations. Alinsky's book leaves the impression of a sinister, cold, and calculating individual. His use of community organizing was really a form of gradual revolution. The differences between Alinsky and his forerunners were several. First, both old and new leftists were at least idealistic in their rhetoric, while Alinsky stripped revolution of its idealistic veneer and exposed it as a naked power struggle. When he conducted training for community organizations, he would routinely ask the trainees, why organize? Some would say that it was to help others, but Alinsky would roar back, you want to organize for power. In the training manual that Alinsky followers went by, it said, quote, we are not virtuous by not wanting power. We are really cowards for not wanting power. And, quote, power is good. Powerlessness is evil. Second, Alinsky didn't think much of the rebellious youth of the 60s, who were publicly against government and society. He stressed that whenever possible, one should enter the system, while biding time for opportunities to subvert it from within. Third, Alinsky's ultimate goal was to subvert and destroy, not to benefit any group. Thus, in implementing his plan, it was necessary to conceal the real purpose with localized or staged goals that were seemingly reasonable or harmless by themselves, to mobilize large crowds to action. When people were accustomed to being mobilized, it was relatively easy to mobilize them to act toward more radical goals. In Rules for Radicals, Alinsky said, any revolutionary change must be preceded by a passive, affirmative, non-challenging attitude toward change among the mass of our people. Remember, once you organize people around something that's commonly agreed upon as pollution, then an organized people is on the move. From there, it's a short and natural step to political pollution, to Pentagon pollution. A leader from Students for a Democratic Society, who was deeply influenced by Alinsky, nailed the essence of radicalizing protests. Quote, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. The radical left after the 60s was deeply influenced by Alinsky and always turned the response to any social issue into dissatisfaction with the status quo overall, as a stepping stone for advancing the revolutionary cause.
Look familiar?
Fourth, Alinsky turned politics into a guerrilla war without restraint. In explaining his strategy for community organizing, Alinsky told his followers that they need to hit the enemy's eyes, ears, and nose. As he writes in Rules for Radicals, quote, "First the eyes. If you have organized a vast, mass-based people's organization, you can parade it visibly before the enemy and openly show your power. Second, the ears. If your organization is small in numbers, then do what Gideon did. Conceal the members in the dark, but raise a din and clamor that will make the listener believe that your organization numbers many more than it does. Third, the nose. If your organization is too tiny even for noise, stink up the place. Fifth, including laziness, greed, envy, and hatred. Sometimes participants in his campaigns would win petty gains, but this only made them more cynical and shameless. In order to subvert the political system and social order of free countries, Alinsky was happy to lead his followers to moral bankruptcy. From this, it can be inferred that if he were to truly gain power, he would neither take care of nor pity his former comrades. Decades later, two prominent figures in American politics who were deeply influenced by Alinsky helped to usher in the silent revolution that has subverted American civilization, traditions, and values. At the same time, the no-holds-barred, unrestricted guerrilla warfare type protests advocated by Alinsky became popular in America from the 1970s on. This is clear through the, quote, vomit in protest in 1999 against the World Trade Organization in Seattle, where protesters ingested a drug that induced vomiting, then collectively vomited in the plaza and conference center. The Occupy Wall Street movement, the Antifa movement, and so on. It's important to note that in one of the introductory pages for Rules for Radicals, Alinsky gave his, quote, acknowledgement to the very first radical, Lucifer. Further, in an interview with Playboy magazine shortly before his death, Alinsky said that when he died, he would, quote, unreservedly choose to go to hell and begin to organize the proletariat there because, quote, they're my kind of people. This expanded definition in law, thus using the law to force schools, media, and internet companies to conform. This is a step toward the same strictures on speech as found in communist states. After the 2016 U.S. presidential election, the United States became further divided. Protest marches erupted in major cities, and violations of freedom of speech occurred with greater frequency. In September 2017, an appearance by conservative author Ben Shapiro, who had been invited to speak at the University of California, Berkeley, was derailed due to Antifa's threats of violence. Berkeley police stood ready and dispatched 3 police helicopters. The security measures were estimated to have cost more than $600,000. A reporter asked a young student protester, "What about the First Amendment?" To which the student replied that it was no longer a relevant document. Ironically, one signature event that marked the start of the student movement in 1964 was a fight for freedom of speech at Berkeley. These days, the left uses the right to speech in its attempts to deprive others of having a legitimate outlet for their own voice. In March 2017, American social scientist Charles Murray was invited to speak at Middlebury College in Vermont. While there, he was physically assaulted, and an accompanying professor at the college was injured. In March 2018, tenured professor Amy Wax of the University of Pennsylvania School of Law was relieved of some teaching duties after publishing a politically incorrect article. Other organizations, acting under the banner of opposing hate speech, have labeled regular conservative groups as hate groups. In addition, there have been cases of conservative authors and scholars being threatened about speaking at or attending various events. The intrusion on freedom of speech by the left is not part of normal debate between people with differing ideas. Instead, it's about the specter of communism using people with ill intent, provoking them to obscure the truth and suppress righteous, or at least normal, voices. Political correctness, in essence, is about substituting deviant political and moral standards for righteous ones. It is the devil's thought police.